In this video, we're doing a deep dive into lo mein, and I'm going to show you 3 very different versions you can make, but first, I need to tell you why I was wrong about lo mein. You see, I've never really been a big fan of this dish, and that's mainly because every time I order it for takeout, it looks like this. Mostly noodles, barely any protein or vegetables, and the flavor is just fine. It's not bad, but I'd almost always rather be going to town on something like Sichuan beef or Kung Pao chicken instead. However, that completely changed once I started making it at home, and I now believe that lo mein is one of the most useful dishes you can learn for 3 reasons. First, it's one of the easiest ways to turn random fridge leftovers into a great weeknight meal. Second, it's incredibly customizable. Once you understand the framework, you can make a high-protein, low-calorie version, or go all in on something like a spicy beef lo mein that will surely tickle the taste buds. And third, which is the biggest one, it makes what might be the best leftovers of all time. So throughout this video, we're going to break down the lo mein framework, and I'll show you all the choices I made to make 3 different versions, and by the end, I promise you'll know how to create a bowl of glossy, deeply seasoned noodles with crisp vegetables and tender flavorful protein exactly how you like it. So I'm going to meet you back here for a final taste test with our 3 homemade versions versus this takeout version. But to start, let's talk about the noodles. And I think this is one of the biggest upgrades you can make over takeout because of one thing: texture control. Traditionally, lo mein uses a wheat-based noodle, and sometimes they'll be made with egg, like these fresh lo mein noodles, which gives them that slight yellow color, and more importantly, that springy, chewy texture that holds up really well to the sauce, vegetables, and protein. And how you cook your noodles is really important, because if you go to a buffet or a lot of takeout spots, those lo mein noodles have usually been cooked ahead of time and are sitting around in the sauce, so by the time you actually eat them, they're just kind of soft and not that interesting. However, when you make them at home, you have full control. You can cook them fresh and keep that springy chew and bite, which I find absolutely addictive. Now, the biggest mistake that most people make when it comes to the noodles are not knowing which ones to buy, because there are definitely some differences. However, if you go to an Asian grocery store, you're usually going to see 3 main categories. First are fresh noodles. These are often coated in a little bit of starch to keep them from sticking, and then need to be boiled for a few minutes like fresh pasta. Second are par-cooked noodles. These noodles are partially cooked and then lightly coated in a bit of oil, so they're very quick to work with. And lastly are dried noodles, which are more similar to something like a dried pasta and need to be fully cooked in boiled water before using. Now, you can absolutely use things like spaghetti, ramen, or really any stir-fry noodle and still get a good result, but I do think it's worth grabbing either the fresh or par-cooked noodles when you can, because part of the fun is just those slight differences in the shape and texture. And I found 3 different versions at the store that I want to try. So for our classic takeout lo mein, I'm going to use standard fresh lo mein noodles. For the spicy beef, I found these thicker broad noodles, which you can see they've just got a bit more texture to them for the sauce. And then for the high protein version, I found these thinner noodles. I'm going to use slightly less noodles, so I want them evenly spread throughout the dish. And now that we have our noodle choices, the next big mistake that most people make after buying them is just overcooking the noodles. So whatever the package says, I would recommend sticking to the lower end of that range, because they're going to cook a little bit more once they are tossed with the sauce. And this brings us to our second component and a question that I've had for a long time. What actually is the difference between lo mein and chow mein? I've never fully understood the difference here, because the way these terms are used and what dish is actually served to you at a restaurant can definitely vary quite a bit from place to place. But as far as I can tell, the key difference should be how the noodles are actually cooked with the sauce. Linguistically, chow mein translates to stir-fried noodles, which would mean they're cooked directly in the pan, and you actually want to develop some browning or crispness on the noodles themselves. And like other stir-fries, seasonings and sauces are typically added, but it's definitely on the drier side. Lo mein, on the other hand, translates to tossed noodles, and while it's still made in the wok, you are essentially tossing the noodles with the sauce rather than focusing on kind of stir-frying them until they're crisp. Now in practice, there's definitely some overlap and inconsistency here. Like, I've definitely ordered a chow mein that was fairly saucy, so you might want to double check a menu or ask your waiter if you are ordering this dish. However, the best part, again, about making it at home is that you can control the texture exactly how you like it. Now, the tricky part when it comes to the sauce is everybody makes it slightly different. And if you watch a bunch of recipes online, it's actually pretty hard to tell what every ingredient is doing. So I'm going to break down the general sauce flavor profile, then show you the 3 specific variations I made so we can see how the ingredients are going to change the flavor in the final taste test. At a high level, lo mein sauce is primarily salty and umami with a little bit of sweetness, some savory aromas, and then we want the texture thick enough so it clings to the noodles. And once you understand that, all of these ingredients you'll see in recipes start to make a lot more sense because they're playing these specific roles. So first, we have the salty and umami ingredients. These are things like the oyster sauce, light soy sauce, dark soy sauce, and chicken bouillon. They're all primarily bringing salty and umami taste. Then you have your sweet ingredients. Oyster sauce actually has some sugar in it already, but you'll typically see plain sugar added as well, and other options could be honey or even something like hoisin. Now the goal isn't to make it so sweet like a sweet and sour sauce, for example. It's more just to have enough sweetness to balance out the salt and make everything more rounded. Then finally, we have what I think of as the aroma and finishing ingredients. So these are things like sesame oil or chili oil, white pepper, chicken broth, water, or some Chinese cooking wine. And all of these are going to add a little fragrance and complexity and make that sauce feel more complete. And lastly, there's typically a thickener like a cornstarch slurry to make it all saucy and cohesive for the noodles. And now that we understand the core elements at play here, let me show you the 3 different versions of the sauce that I made. For the classic takeout version, I started with 2 parts or 50 grams of oyster sauce, then 1 part of soy sauce, but I split this up into 20 grams of light soy sauce and 5 grams of dark soy sauce. Then I added a spoonful of chicken bouillon powder along with 10 grams of sugar, and I finished it with some white pepper and a splash of water just to thin out the sauce. And this first one is a pretty classic, slightly sweeter profile, which as you can see is going to create that nicely seasoned noodle with that slight brownish tint. Now, if we take a look at the spicy beef lo mein, you'll notice the noodles are quite a bit darker, and this is because I changed a few ingredients. Again, I started with that 50 grams of oyster sauce, but this time I went for just 10 grams of light soy sauce and then added 10 grams of dark soy sauce, so quite a bit more. I also added 5 grams of beef bouillon, and I didn't add any extra sugar, so this is going to give us a darker, more savory sauce. And the reason this works is because it's going to stand up to the rest of the dish, which is richer beef, heavier spicy aromatics, so everything is going to stay balanced instead of getting washed out. Then lastly, if we look at the chicken lo mein, this is going to have the lightest of all the sauces. So for this one, I used 25 grams of light soy sauce, 10 grams of sugar, 15 grams of oyster sauce, 5 grams of some chicken bouillon, and then just added water to thin it out. So to sum it up, we kind of have 3 different sauce flavor profiles. First, we have that balanced, salty, umami, and slightly sweet classic takeout sauce. Then we have that darker, roastier sauce, which is going to hold up really well to the beef and the chilies. And lastly, a lighter chicken-forward sauce that is going to pair very well with lots of vegetables. And once you've chosen your sauce, this is where things start to open up, because next, we're going to layer in the fresh aromatics. And this is a very fun area of lo mein you can experiment with. The way the aromatics work is simple. Dice or mince them up, add them to the hot oil to bloom, and then pour your sauce over the top. And this fresh aromatic layer is going to balance the richness of the sauce and make the dish feel more complete. Now, traditionally, lo mein keeps it pretty simple, usually just some garlic and maybe some ginger. But at home, you can use up any aromatic vegetable you may happen to have laying around. This could be ginger, leeks, fresh chilies, onions, shallots, any pepper, or any vegetable that's aromatic. So for my versions, I went in 3 different aromatic directions. For the first one, I kept it simple with just a lot of garlic. You can't really go wrong there. But for the spicy beef version, I used diced shallot and Thai bird's eye chilies. And this is where I'm going to build in that heat and intensity. The chilies are going to bring that sharp, punchy spice that is going to help cut through the richer beef and sauce. Then, for the lighter chicken lo mein, I went with the classic ginger and garlic combo. The ginger just helps keep everything fresh and almost clean while making that dish feel light and on your feet, ready to go after a workout. So now that we have our noodles, sauce, and aromatics, you could technically stop right here and have a really solid lo mein. But to me, where this dish becomes genuinely useful and almost kind of life-changing is in the proteins in vegetables, because this is where lo mein turns into a system. You can make it lighter, you can make it high protein, you can use up leftovers or build it around whatever you have in your fridge. So let me show you the choices that I made for the vegetables and protein, but try to keep in mind the choices that you may want to make as we go. For the protein, the process is simple. We're first going to lightly marinate it, then just cook everything separately in a high heat wok to develop some browning. And the three most common options you'll see at a takeout spot are chicken, beef, and shrimp, so that's what I'm doing today. Starting with the shrimp, I added some frozen, peeled, and deveined shrimp into a bowl and then added a sprinkle of salt and just a tiny drizzle of sesame oil. And when this cooks up, the shrimp is going to be nice and tender and just have that little bit of sesame aroma. Now, for the beef, I'm doing a slightly more involved marinade. So I started by slicing a piece of sirloin into strips, but really any cut of beef will work. Then I added the beef to a bowl along with a splash of light soy sauce, a little bit of sugar, a pinch of baking soda to help tenderize it, a spoonful of chili crisps for some heat and fat, then a bit of cornstarch to help it brown and stay juicy. Mix that together and you get these nicely coated, well-seasoned pieces of beef. Then for the chicken, again, I'm keeping it pretty simple here. A splash of light soy sauce, a little chicken bouillon powder to really boost that chicken flavor, some sesame oil for more aroma, and then a bit of Chinese cooking wine. Mix that up and you've got a really clean, well-seasoned base. And now that we've got our proteins covered, let's talk the vegetables. And this is where I think lo mein really starts to shine, because the vegetables are what are going to bring the color, texture, and a lot of the visual appeal. So the general approach is simple. First, we're going to choose a variety of colored vegetables. Then we're going to slice the vegetables to roughly match the shape of the noodles, so longer and thinner pieces. Then we're going to cook the hearty vegetables in the wok with a little salt or soy sauce and a splash of Chinese cooking wine. And lastly, stir the fresher vegetables in at the end. So these are things like bean sprouts and scallions. So for a shrimp version, I went pretty classic with carrots, red onion, cabbage, and then some bean sprouts and green onions, which I'm going to toss in at the end. So you can see me cooking up the carrots, onions, and cabbage first. Then once everything else is in there, I threw the sprouts and scallions in with those noodles. For the spicy beef, I mixed it up a little bit. I used some bell peppers, carrots, green onions, and then I found these really nice mushrooms. And this is a good example of thinking about contrast. You've got the darker mushrooms, the bright peppers, and everything's gonna play off each other nice and visually. Then for the chicken version, to make a lower calorie version, I kind of upped the amount of vegetables. I used some Chinese broccoli, yellow squash, bell pepper, red onion, and bean sprouts, which are tossed in at the end. And as you can see, all of these choices really layer together. They're all lo mein, but visually they have a completely different feel depending on the vegetables we use. So now let's do a final taste test and compare them to the takeout version. Okay, so let's do the final taste test. I have already kind of tasted them individually as I was making them, but it's always so illuminating when you actually taste things side by side. So let's do just that. And I think right away we can see the takeout lo mein, like this is what I feel like I would always get into. It feels like it's mostly noodles, like there are some vegetables, there's some bell peppers, there's a little broccoli in here, there are some pieces of chicken, but overall it kind of feels like more of noodles, but let's give it a shot. So I've not ordered from this particular place before, but I would say that echoes my common experience with lo mein and why I was never a big fan of it. It's kind of one of those dishes where it's just kind of fine. It doesn't make me feel anything. It's a dish that I would hope maybe someone else would order so I could have like a bite or two of it, but I would much rather be ordering a lot of other things on the menu. However, like I said, that changed when I started making it at home, and as you can see right away, visually with the ratios of kind of the noodles and proteins, very different in our homemade versions, and that's why I think it's just such a good dish to make at home, because, you know, mostly noodles versus mostly protein and vegetables, or kind of half and half rather, not to mention the different flavor profiles as well. So for this first one, sauce and noodle wise, I would say this is fairly close to the kind of takeout version. Again, very similar noodles, a little bit thicker, which I like over the takeout version. And then the sauce, it's a little bit sweet, little umami, a little salty, but not any way overpowering. Just like a good classic. You could mix up this version with any variety of like vegetables and proteins. You're gonna be in for a good time. However, now we're gonna move to number two, and this is the spicy beef lo mein, which I love spicy stuff. So this is not something that you could really order a lot of places. So more beefy sauce, spicy components in here. Let's get into it. For me, I think this is like the best lo mein that I've ever had, because I kind of made it exactly how I wanted it. But the spiciness you get from those Thai bird's eye chilies, and then the sauce isn't quite as sweet, but it's much more savory from kind of that
The beef bouillon we put in there, and then the tender beef pieces are just really nice to bite into. And then I really like that mix of kind of the mushroom with the bell peppers, and you get a little freshness from those scallions in there. For me, this is probably the best lo mein I've ever had. I think noodle-wise, these are a decent option, although I think I do like the texture of kind of those fresh lo mein noodles. A little bit thicker, these are a little bit thinner, but still really, really good. And lastly, let's kind of go to our healthy chicken lo mein. So more vegetables, more protein in this, just less noodles to kind of lower the calorie count. It's crazy how the ginger comes through in this. It makes such a big difference. Like, you get Thai chilies here, you get kind of just garlic here. The ginger just, it makes it feel more healthy. I really like ginger. For being like a lower calorie, kind of healthier version, this one is surprisingly good. So this taste test totally sums up why I'm such a big fan of making lo mein at home. Each of these kind of brings something else to the table, and they're kind of like an upgrade over the takeout version, which again, it's fine. But again, when you can mix in more vegetables, when you can change your sauces, change up the aromatics, and really shape the direction of your dish, it's really, really fun. So we're gonna have recipes for each of these linked down below, as well as in the Cookwell app, and we're gonna have a lo mein framework as well, where you can actually edit your ingredients to match whatever you may have in the fridge, freezer, and pantry to make some great lo mein at home. But anyway, that is going to wrap it up for me in this one. Let me know which version of these you wanna make down below, but I will catch you all in the next one. Peace, y'all.